I'm here with one of Oliver Fisher's commercial and residential solicitors. We'll be talking us through the process of conveyancing, whether you're a first-time seller or first-time buyer, just to get you familiar with the process. So thank you so much for meeting with me today.
Yeah, pleasure.
Can you introduce yourself to everyone?
Yes, my name is Alireza Nurbakhsh. I'm a commercial property and residential conveyancing solicitor at Oliver Fisher, and I'm happy to talk you through conveyancing procedure today.
How would the process from instructing an agent to sell and having the sale agreed, how would that then pass on to you? What would be the first step?
The first step is for the client to get in touch with us and to instruct us after agreeing to the cost involved, the quotation they usually get. Once they've been instructed, then we ask the estate agent to issue a memorandum of sale and basically noting all the parties involved, and so we can contact with the buyer solicitors, and everybody has to confirm instruction at this point. After that, we will send a number of forms to the seller, our client, to complete before we can actually send a draft contract to the buyer solicitors.
What sort of information are you asking for in that initial form?
Yes, the initial forms, there are usually two forms. It is a freehold property, it's fixture and fittings, basically what's included in the sale of the property and what's excluded. And the other form is property information form, basically detailed information about the property boundaries and whether there's any dispute and whether there's guarantees available with respect to the works done on the property and items such as that. So the buyer has a full view of the property they're buying.
Good.
And if it's a leasehold, there will be an additional leasehold information form that they have to complete, and also another form, which is the leasehold questionnaire form, which is LPE1. It usually goes to the managing agent, and they have to provide details about the service charge, insurance, the future works on the property, and items such as that.
Yeah, something that we used to get quite often when it came to the LPE1 forms and selling a leasehold property, I think there's a lot of people who may relate to this, is the pace at which you get the responses back from the management agent. Is there any advice you can give to really expedite that part of the process? Because we find, obviously, as agents, we try and expedite that by calling them and saying, please, can you fill this form in as soon as possible, not to hold up the sale.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that you, agents or sellers, could possibly do to speed it up?
Yes. Obviously, from managing agent, the process is different, but I completely agree with you. One of the things you can do to expedite it, to just basically, at the beginning of the process, identify the managing agent right away and send the LPE1, and do not wait for the buyer to ask for LPE1. So, and the second thing is basically make sure you send the fees to the managing agent by bank transfer. Don't send a check, because they usually take about 5 or 6 working days until the check is cleared in order to respond. So that's another.
That's brilliant. That is something that we often had come up, and it delays the process at such an early stage.
That's
when it could be a much, if it's just a case of responding with the answers to those questions, it would just be a much quicker first hurdle, wouldn't it? So from there, what would be the next step once you had the LPE1 form and all the documentation?
Well, then we draft a contract, and based on the information we have on the purchase price and the parties involved, and send the contract together with all the completed forms and all the documents that we receive from the sellers, such as if there's a planning permission or building regulation certificate or gas certificate. So it's important that the client provide all the documents available, because usually if they don't and the buyer searches show up certain documents registered against the property, they will then ask for these documents. And so the sooner we actually provide all the documents, the sooner we can actually complete the deal.
That makes sense. And I think this is again something that's come up where if you're not getting all the details to your solicitor, it actually does take time for the solicitor to then communicate with the other side's conveyancing team and then getting that documentation over, because again, what should maybe be a case of sending over a copy or sending over hard copies where necessary of any guarantees, it does actually slow the process down depending on the processes in place for different conveyancing firms. So whatever documentation you have on your property, put it out there, give it to your conveyancer and let them have all the answers ready for your buyer, and it really does speed the process up. If you don't have it, it slows it right down as well. So sort of from there, what would you say is the next?
So after that, usually the buyer will take a few days to review the documents and then raise inquiries. The inquiries raise, the ranges from issues about as I said, the planning permission, building regulation certificates, and based on the answers that our clients, the seller, has provided, they will ask further sort of questions. For example, if the seller said there's been an incident of flooding in the past in the property, the buyer wants to know that the matter has been dealt with satisfactorily and all the invoices been paid, and that sort of question they will raise. Then we go back, all these questions, with these questions we go back to our clients. Some of these questions, of course, they are factual questions and our clients only can answer that. So we go back to them, and once they provide answers to us, and if there are any other questions that basically requires our basic direct response, such as undertake to clear the service charge on completion, we answer those questions, and then when we have a complete list of answers to all the questions, we send it back to the buyer. And this process goes back and forth.
It can.
It can for a while, until the buyer is satisfied that all the questions are answered properly. And once that's done, then we have to basically agree on an exchange date and a completion date, and ask the clients to come to sign the papers, which consist of the transfer
of deeds.
Transfer of deeds, and also the contract.
Okay. I think something prior to this stage, which we obviously we get asked as well, or we come across, which can cause a substantial delay sometimes, depending on the property and anything against it, is indemnity insurance. So you might hear this mentioned, whether you're selling leasehold or freehold, you can come across this. So in terms of describing, because there's not much clarity, there can be some confusion as to what is indemnity insurance. So just to cover that, how would you best describe indemnity insurance? Indemnity
insurance usually insurance policy that the sellers will secure against lack of documents. Certain, for example, if you don't have building regulation certificate and it's registered against the property, it's one way to deal with it is to provide indemnity insurance. For example, another usual scenario would be when you've done something in the property, and for example certain alterations, and you haven't secured the consent of the landlord, and that would be the breach of the terms of the lease, because all the alteration has to be with the landlord's consent. So what would happen in scenarios like that, instead of going to the landlord and because of the cost involved and the possibility the landlord may not give its consent for retrospective consent for the alteration done, so you provide indemnity insurance. And the cost of these indemnity insurance again varies slightly from one insurance company to another.
So would you recommend shopping around for getting that policy in place instead of just going with one?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. It's been really helpful. Thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure.
And I hope this sort of, if you're a first-time seller, sometimes the process can be different. And obviously for first-time buyers, it's just good to get an idea that there are going to be lots of forms to fill in. A lot of this is to do with, it's all legalities. So things like obviously anti-money laundering forms, and that's why you get asked for identification. So I hope you found this helpful in terms of whether you're buying for the first time or selling for the first time. My advice is definitely, when it comes to the quotations on your conveyancing, every conveyancer will recommend getting maybe a couple of quotes based on, obviously, no matter who, if you're a seller or a buyer, get a couple of quotes. Costs can vary. And please know that I think it's very important to say that the cheapest quote isn't necessarily the best one. It is all unpacked in this service. So cheap isn't always best. You will get value for money, especially from your conveyancer's service perspective as well, and I'm sure you'll agree, is get a few quotes, but cheap isn't always best. You want a conveyancer who will look after you and look after the process as well. Thank you so much for meeting with us today.
My pleasure.